Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. My name is Joseph Papa, and I serve on the board of the Library of Virginia Foundation and as co-chair for the annual Library of Virginia Literary Awards celebration. I'm delighted to welcome you to this evening's fiction finalist panel. This conversation this evening will be moderated by my fellow Library of Virginia Foundation board member, Brad Parks, and he will be joined by two of the finalists this evening, Rachel Beanland and Brian Castleberry. The third finalist in this category, Alma Okatsu, is unable to join this evening, but be sure to learn more about her book called The Deep. Before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the generosity of the donors who have made the library's work possible, most notably this evening, Dominion Energy, our presenting sponsor. The Library of Virginia's, the Library of Virginia Foundation's work to find the vital resources that help the library collect, preserve, and share Virginia's stories. While the library is a state agency, much of the work that they do, especially in areas of education, historic preservation, and public programming, wouldn't be possible without generous support from people like you. Tonight, I'd love to ask for you to consider joining me in supporting the Library of Virginia by calling 804-692-3900. You can speak to a real person, I believe, or you can visit a link on your screen in the comments. And on behalf of all of us at the Library of Virginia, I'd like to thank you for your support and thank those who have already given. I'd now like to introduce the moderator for this evening, and who I mentioned is Brad Parks, an international best-selling author and the only author to have won the Seamus, Nero, and Lefty Awards, three of crime fiction's most prestigious prizes. His 11 novels have been published in 15 different languages and have won critical acclaim across the globe. He's a former journalist and is now a full-time novelist who lives in Tidewater, Virginia, with his wife and two children. He's a proud board member of the Library of Virginia Foundation, and if you ever get the chance to hear him speak about one of his own books, I highly recommend you take that opportunity. I'd now like to welcome Brad and our fiction finalist.
Joseph, thank you so much for that gracious introduction. It is wonderful to be here this evening and a real honor to be moderating this panel, and certainly my pleasure to help you get to know our Library of Virginia Fiction Award finalists for 2021. Merely being nominated for this award is truly a special achievement. The library receives over 100 nominations every year for this award, and then has a panel of 10 professional readers who go through quite carefully those nominations to come up with our finalists. So you're really seeing some authors who have written some highly accomplished works and have truly risen above an already a special field of writers. So it's going to be a real treat to hear from them and to get to know them a little bit. We will be taking questions at the end of the program. And for those of you, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, there are places where you can type your questions in. Please feel free to do so while the program is going on. We'll probably just get to the questions at the end. But I know, speaking for myself as an author, I always love the Q&A because that's when I actually know I'm talking about something that my audience actually wants to hear about. So please don't be shy, all of you viewing at home. So we will begin by introducing Alma Okatsu. She could not be here due to a family emergency, and certainly our hearts go out to Alma. I'm still going to introduce her because, hey, she is still a very accomplished finalist and, deserves equal airtime. So Alma Okatsu is the author of 6 novels, including the Library of Virginia Fiction Award nominee, The Deep, which was also a finalist for the Bram Stoker Award for Superior Achievement in a Novel, a finalist for the Locus Award for Best Horror Novel, and was named one of the Washington Post's favorite scary stories. Her work has been translated into 12 languages and won starred reviews from Publishers Weekly, Booklist, and Library Journal. She has an undergraduate degree from Brandeis, a master's in writing from Johns Hopkins. Before becoming a novelist, Alma had a long career as an intelligence officer for our government, including 25 years with the National Security Agency and 8 years at the CIA, most of which she really can't talk about. And that's actually not a lie. She can't talk about it. I know, I've asked. Anyhow, she has also worked as a senior policy analyst for the RAND Corporation. She lives outside of Washington, D.C. with her husband. Her most recent novel is Red Widow, which, appropriately enough, is a spy novel. Again, very sorry that Alma can't be with us because in addition to her wonderful writing, she has a sparkling personality. So please do check out her books. So moving on to the writers who are with us this evening. Rachel Beanland is a graduate of the University of South Carolina and has an MFA in creative writing from VCU. She lives in Richmond with her family and, most importantly for our purposes, is the author of Florence Adler Swims Forever. And are you ready for this list of accomplishments? Okay, here goes. It was the winner of the National Jewish Book Award for debut fiction, a New York Times Book Review Editor Choice, and one of USA Today's best books of 2020. It was also, and this is a very rare trifecta, a Barnes & Noble Monthly Book Club pick, an Indie Next selection by the American Booksellers Association, and an Amazon Best Book of the Month, making Florence Adler Swims Forever literally the only thing that Amazon, the ABA, and Barnes & Noble can all agree on. Congratulations for that. It also got love from Parade Magazine, Good Morning America, the list goes on. But my favorite review came from a writer who called Rachel an assured and dazzling debut writer. And it's my favorite blurb because it was written by none other than Brian Castleberry. So now introducing Brian Castleberry. And by the way, that's what we in the moderating business call a segue. Okay. And I hope you watch that happening right in front of you. Brian Castleberry has had short stories published in the Southern Review, Day One, Narrative, and many other esteemed literary journals. He is a college dropout who has worked as a cook, a dishwasher, a carny, a shoe salesman, a receptionist, and a waiter. Eventually, he did go back to school, earning an undergraduate degree from Oklahoma State University and an MFA in creative writing from, again, VCU. He is now a professor of English who teaches creative writing at the University of William & Mary. He lives in Richmond with his wife, to whom he was married in Vegas by an Elvis impersonator. His debut novel, Nine Shiny Objects, was an Indie Next selection and a New York Times Editor Choice, and was longlisted for the PEN/Faulkner Award. The New York Times said of Nine Shiny Objects, each chapter is a neatly packed and well-researched time capsule. Although that, again, is only my second favorite blurb. My favorite blurb is by an author who called this book a literary saga that dauntlessly explores what it takes to believe. And that author was Rachel Beanland. I hope you guys all see it. Like, this is hard work, what I'm doing here, people. Okay, don't take it for granted to circle it around. I mean, this is what we get paid for to do as authors. So I'm going to ask each author to kind of talk about the origin story of their book for a little bit. But first, I have to ask the awkward question. Brian, you blurb Rachel's book. Rachel, you blurb Brian's book. Do you guys know each other or something?
So we coincidentally have the same agent. That's the connection. So if Chad Lubel is watching this, he gets like a big clap.
Oh, yeah.
Like that is, he took us both to publication as debut authors.
That's right.
Rachel, sorry, Brian, I don't mean to interrupt. Brad, I wanted to, your camera went off. So if you wouldn't mind maybe either turning it back on or restarting your computer. And then I'll let you two finish that story.
I will be right back, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Brad.
Well, Brian and I can like do this all day long.
I moved. I relocated in my house because I assumed my duties were off for a bit. But I did notice that I follow your agent on Twitter because I'm a book publicist, and I did not know you had the same agent, but I saw that they tagged you both, and I thought, how convivial. But then I put two and two together.
Oh, there's Brad.
There's Brad.
Hello. It's really a credit to VCU.
We've just established that Brian Lubel gets 15% of this panel tonight.
Yeah, okay. Totally. He deserves it.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, so I missed. But you guys know each other beyond sharing an agent, or?
That's how we met.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's how we met. Since then, we've become friends. Yeah, and our books came out just a month or two apart, so we weathered the storm of the 2020 book release era together.
Yeah, that'll bring you very close together.
I am sure.
Releasing books in the middle of a pandemic.
Well, so this gives me an opportunity to tell our audience that I've already told Rachel and Brian ahead of time that they are supposed to interrupt me and ask each other questions because I think they know each other quite well. So if it seems like they're making the moderator completely irrelevant, I have totally requested that they do that. So So let's because some of the people sitting at home might not be familiar with your books yet. Rachel, we'll start with you. And again, I just kind of like a brief origin story because I know Florence Adler Swims Forever was based on a family secret. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So when my grandmother was a little girl, she grew up in Atlantic City, and she was on the beach one day, and her aunt, Florence Lowenthal, she was 19 years old. She was training to swim the English Channel. She went out for a training swim that afternoon. It was the July 4th weekend, and she drowned off of States Avenue. It was, of course, a huge family tragedy. But what made it remarkable, this was in 1929 that it happened. What made it remarkable was that my great grandmother was in the hospital at the time. She was on bed rest. And the family made the decision not to tell her that her sister had died. And it's a story I always grew up knowing and was kind of increasingly fascinated by as I got older, this idea of keeping such a large secret when you really kind of determine it to be for someone else's benefit. And so I wanted to explore it, and fiction felt like the most natural place to do that.
What was remarkable in the novel to me was it wasn't even like they took a second to consider, well, should we tell her? Should we not tell her? Florence's mom just goes, bang, we are not telling her.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Like, I admit, there was so much I had to imagine.
Right.
It happened 90 years ago. And my grandmother was the only person that I really knew from that era. And she was a little girl when it happened. But I imagined that kind of a mother's instinct would take over at that point. So yeah.
So you're a mom.
Mm-hmm.
If I put you in the horrible situation where one of your daughters had drowned and the other one was pregnant on a bed rest in the hospital.
Yeah, I mean, I try never to go there, but what I tell people is that I actually thought I had way more answers in terms of what I would do before I ever started writing the book. I thought I was going to come down really hard on the mother, for making this decision. As a young, woman, a teenager, and a young adult, I had kind of come down hard on the family members in the story. And so I assumed that that's where I would go with the book. But, I wrote the book from 7 perspectives, one of which was the mother's. And, after kind of walking a mile in her shoes, by the time I got to the end of the book, I was a lot more sympathetic toward her. So I really couldn't tell you what I would do in the situation. I hope I'm never, ever in it. So.
Yeah. And it's another reminder. And this is, of course, what fiction is all about and why we love it so much. I mean, reading fiction and writing fiction for that matter is an act of empathy, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's always, we have to be putting ourselves in another person's position. So, so Brian, with yours, the origin story there begins with a newspaper headline: 9 shiny objects streak across the night sky. Mm-hmm. Please tell us how you go from a newspaper headline to an entire bloomin' novel, because I really would love to know how that happens.
Well, I mean, I guess it's kind of complicated. I was really interested in the last half of the 20th century, and I started thinking about how our culture had changed, how it had helped kind of create the America that we're in now, and I wanted to try to understand that. So I kind of launched into trying to write a book about it. And something I kept coming back to was the kind of paranoia and the fantasizing that we do about aliens and UFOs, especially in the mid part of the century. So that kind of like launched me. This idea of spotting UFOs for the first time before anybody's really thought about them, and how it impacts people and how it kind of creates all these offshoots of kind of anti-government paranoia on one side, and then like daydreaming about ideal worlds on the other side. And everything else in between. So I guess that's where it kind of got started for me. I actually, way back in grad school, I started writing a book that was that had some flying saucers in it and used the same title. It was very, very different. It was a completely different book, but I did keep the title, and I kept one character. Charlie Rannigan was the only character that remained, and he's kind of a bit player in the book now, but before he used to be like the lead character. 10 or 12 years ago, whenever it was I was working on that. yeah, I guess mine with my book, I kind of set out to try to think about what's happened to America, what we've done to ourselves over the last 70 years that's kind of brought us to this moment of division and inability to even kind of see across to each other, to understand some kind of common good. And I kept that in mind a lot as I was writing. I think that's why some people look at my book and feel like it's really fragmented and it goes in a lot of different directions. And for me, I was like, I kind of had to do that to understand what we were up to as a country. So I don't know how best that answers the question, but yeah, flying saucers.
It actually, yeah, flying saucers, and I know that we're suddenly I think we're about to enter into a new UFO era. Except this time the UFO might actually be real. If you've looked at some of this footage now.
Yeah, it's been strange. The whole time my book's been out, Chad, our agent, has been sending me these updates and New York Times stories and videos and keeping me abreast of it. So it's been really interesting to watch that happen, right alongside everything else.
It's because your agent is thinking like an agent, and he's like, okay, how can I get my client on the Today Show? This will do it. I know I can get him there somehow.
Exactly. He's good. He's good at his job.
He's very good. So there's actually, and for those of you who were watching the nonfiction panel last night, it was a terrific panel moderated by our mutual friend Kristen Green, and it was actually kind of fascinating how there were themes emerging in the nonfiction panel where it was three very disparate books that were all actually kind of in some ways telling the same story and actually had a lot in common. And we're kind of fortunate enough tonight that obviously they're two very different books, but there are some themes in common. First of all, you guys are both mining the past. You have both written historical novels. And whoever wants to start with this and start talking about this, what drew you to the past? What do you got against the present anyway? But what does that allow you to do as a writer to be exploring the past? Whoever.
Well, Brian, you want to take it first?
Yeah, I guess I will. Only because I'm nervous about being live. So I just start blurting things out. I love history. That's one thing. I'm really interested in history. I read a lot of history and biographies and everything, and I feel like it helps us understand now so much. If we're just here in the present all the time, we don't know where anything's come from or why it's the way it is and how it can be different. So I'm always drawn to understanding those threads, to looking back and to see how we kind of built things into what they are. My wife's the public archaeologist at Colonial Williamsburg, so we're a very historical household. We're very much into history, and I think that's what drew me to this book and other work I've done in that field. How about you, Rachel?
I think I really kind of fell into it because I was interested in this particular story, and I thought about setting it in a variety of times. Like I wasn't necessarily committed. The real story happened in 1929, and I ended up setting the book in 1934 for a couple of different reasons. But I would have considered writing a contemporary novel with this idea, at the start. But what stopped me was that it's pretty much impossible to keep a death from somebody in 2021. We have so much social media and we're just too connected. So I knew I had to go back into the past, and the question was just how far, I had to go. I wanted to avoid 1929 because of the stock market crash, and I just didn't want to set it in that time period. But there were other reasons to move it forward as well. So I kind of got there by accident, and I don't know if I'll stay in the past. But what I did find was that I really enjoyed the research. I had to do a lot of it to get the book right. And it was something that added kind of another layer for me with writing. Was really rewarding.
Yeah, I love the research. I feel like that's so much of the fun as you're writing, to be able to just go out there and dig in and find out, what would this what kind of gum would they chew, or whatever little details.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. And even like bigger things that then kind of work their way into the narrative of the story, because you realize, oh, of course, everyone would have been concerned with this, particular national event in this era. Or it becomes really almost like putting a puzzle together, to fit all these pieces together and think about what were my characters' concerns in that time period. And I mean, the book I'm working on right now, like the Library of Virginia, for instance, has been super helpful. I wasn't able to go to them as much with an Atlantic City novel, but that's where these libraries come into play, if I can give them a little credit.
I was about to say, Rachel, you get credit for being the first Library of Virginia plug of the evening. So hang one on the scoreboard for Rachel. Diving into research a little bit. And so here's by the way, a fascinating Atlantic City 1929 tidbit, Rachel, that I used to be a reporter with the New York Star Ledger. It was New Jersey's paper. So, I got all over the place at various points in time. And I bumped across this stat. In 1929, the summer of 1929 in Atlantic City, 12 million people visited Atlantic City in the summer of 1929. It was, right before the stock market crashed, the end of the Roaring '20s. There were only 120 million people in America at the time. So 1 out of every 10 people visited Atlantic City this summer.
Yeah, I mean, when I do book talks across the country, virtually, of course, they're all virtual, but people tell me constantly, oh, my mother got married in Atlantic City, my parents honeymooned in Atlantic City. It was such a popular destination in the kind of 20s, I think, through the 60s. Like, it really didn't start phasing out as a popular destination until we had air travel and air conditioning and could go other places. But it's a really interesting place, I think.
I don't know if you read the Boardwalk Empire. That was then based on but a wonderful snapshot. So what for both of you, and I guess Brian, start with this, and then I'll kick this to Rachel, because Brian, I know your novel was exhaustively researched. For those of you sitting at home who haven't read it, it starts in the 1940s, but then it goes in 5-year segments. So you're really getting a broad swath of the latter half of the 20th century in America. So you researched so many different areas. Like what was like a favorite research story that you bumped across? And it can even be something that you didn't necessarily put in the novel, but just something that really was cool and that really stuck out from your research.
Yeah, the story I like to tell, it was just kind of this great moment of kismet. I had this character named Debbie, she's a teenager in the early 1980s, and she's living in Waterbury, Connecticut, and she's a punk rock kid, and I knew that she needed to hang out at an arcade, and I had all these ideas already for her, and I was like, I'm old enough that I hung out in a lot of arcades in the 80s, so I knew what they were like, but since we're in the day and age that we are, it was really handy to go on YouTube and just search for 80s arcade. I just wanted to kind of remember, like, well, what does it look like? What was the lighting like, and those kind of things. And the most amazing thing happened. The very first video that popped up was from some Facebook fan site, I guess, for a place in Waterbury, Connecticut called Crazy Eights Arcade. It's like an 8-minute video, and I watched the whole thing. It was incredible. It just like brought the place to life for me. And it became a setting. It's not exactly, a carbon copy of the video or anything, but it helped me kind of visualize and imagine the setting really well. And that was just incredible luck. And it goes to show like how helpful the interwebs are with things like this. I mean, you have to build, a lot of foundation in historical stuff, reading books and kind of getting the broad swath of things and all that. But when you get down into the nitty gritty, oftentimes it's like, Googling something, finding out one little thing that, somebody has an old advertisement somewhere for something, and it's just perfect.
And the next thing you know, you're smelling the ionized air coming off the Miss Pac-Man machine. And there we go.
And the smell of chili dogs from the little counter sales thing and stuff like that.
Yeah, so actually, I grew up in Ridgefield, Connecticut, and certainly spent some time in arcade. We had to go to Danbury for the arcade. I don't think we were allowed to go to Waterbury though, like because we were sheltered suburban kids, and Waterbury was kind of like a tough town, right? You know. Yeah. But so Rachel, what about you? Like just a great research story or something that really just pulled you in?
Yeah, I mean, with Atlantic City, I think the single most helpful thing that I discovered, again, kind of on the internet, was postcards. Just, because Atlantic City was such a well-traveled, destination, what all the hotels and boardwalks and restaurants would produce is postcards to, so people would write home and tell their friends to come. So, you could find a postcard for almost any building that I wanted to use. If I wanted to describe, that what they were walking past, or I wanted to have someone go out to lunch, or whatever, wherever I needed them to be, a hotel lobby, I could almost always find a postcard. Usually there were postcards of the exteriors of buildings and the interiors of buildings. And where I found often that the images was on eBay. People would sell kind of a pack of old postcards in, a junk shop or something. They put them on eBay. And, I don't need to keep the postcard forever. I just need to look at it and see, what does this thing look like? And there was even a postcard I found for the hospital beach tent. Like they used to have these tents that were actually like little mini hospitals to treat sunburns and that kind of thing. And that was where my aunt's body had been brought. And I just couldn't visualize what a beach hospital tent was like. And sure enough, there were postcards of it. It's just so bizarre.
Postcards, the Google Street View of the 1920s and 1930s.
I mean, I actually, in fact, you can see a little bit of the map behind me. But I did a big map of Atlantic City on foam core and would put little pins in it. And, I had all my locations figured out. And those postcards came in they were tremendously helpful. So.
Did you ever get tempted to do something? I mean, one of the famous Atlantic City acts was the donkey, jumping off the diving board into the little pool. Did you ever bump across that?
Do you mean the horses?
Was it horse, donkey, pony? I don't know. It was some kind of equine animal. I don't know.
Diving horses that are really famous in Atlantic City, where the diver would be on horseback and go, down quite a number of feet. But they went away and came back, and unfortunately, they were gone when my novel was set. And I didn't.
This is the problem with research.
I didn't take liberties with that kind of thing, because one of my goals, and I think a lot of writers would not have had this as a goal, but one of my goals was I wanted, if you were 90 years old and you lived in Atlantic City and you had been around in 1934, I wanted you to say, yep, she got it right. And so I didn't mess with the history if I could find it.
Yeah, because Rachel, you will get that reader email. Like you will. Yeah. It's guaranteed. Wow. The diving horses didn't come back until 1938. Everyone knows that.
Yeah.
Did anybody even edit this book? I love those kind of.
I knew that would happen. And I've gotten some really lovely emails from quite elderly individuals. I've had correspondence with a 98-year-old man who actually knew my great grandfather in Atlantic City.
Wow.
So yeah, I've heard from all kinds of people, but they have said I got my history right. So I'm very happy about that.
So your book is obviously, Rachel, very rich with setting. And I know, Brian, your book kind of, it jumps around. I mean, it shows us a huge swath of America. I mean, Ali is, 10 different places just in the first scene. What was your favorite? What did you have a favorite place that you quote visited in your fiction?
Oh boy, I don't know.
I stumped the professor already. Okay, note it down, Professor.
When I think of Alice Linwood's section, the radio host, I really liked writing that section in the desert, and I really liked writing Claudette's section in Southern California, outside Del Mar, which would have, back then would have been known just for the horse racing and everything else. Claudette is a waitress at this tiny little roadside, one of those aluminum roadside restaurants from back then. The type of place Betty Davis would work at in like a Warner Brothers movie from like the 30s or something. And I really liked writing that. I had worked out there on the Carney circuit with my friend Jason Christian, and I was kind of familiar with that part of the country, and that was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to write. But really, all of them, I like traveling, and so it was kind of cool just to like make these little spots come to life that I could remember, one or two good things about, and then dig into more to find out about.
Yeah, can we still say Carney, by the way? I threw that into the intro, and I was typing Carney. I'm like, are we allowed to say Carney anymore? I mean, I
think so.
I think okay, it's all good. Okay, that's good. All right, so Brian, then since I kind of stumped you with that one, I'll shift to some turf that maybe you're more familiar with or interested in talking about, and I felt like there was a real theme in your book of kind of the ideal versus the real, let's call it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where there was a great line, and again, so this is the first character you introduce us to, Ali. He's a failed actor. He's a pool hustler, not very good at it. He is standing in 1947, and he's talking about 1957, and this is a line straight from Nine Shiny Objects. He could see it, America in another 10 years, the whole melting pot getting along, focused on tomorrow, a gleaming technological utopia of television communicators and robot cafeterias and trains zipping along at 1,000 miles an hour, right? And as Ali is saying that, of course, he fully believes that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of your book is that really not happening.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that push and pull and how you kind of developed that.
Yeah, that like I was saying earlier, that's part of like what I was thinking from the outset of like that conflict within our culture of always. I feel like America can kind of define itself as along these terms of like a melting pot or a multicultural society, and also a place that's forward thinking, that's always moving ahead, that's innovating. But there's an almost equal force in American culture that's about pulling back and about guarding against, especially whatever the other is at any given time. And for me, that became for me like the plot of the book, like the drama of the book, not just the individual characters' lives, but that push and pull, and how characters, especially like the character of Penrod and others around him, that want to always pull back and want to define America in a different way. And these things I don't feel like these are necessarily like political party terms or ideas all the time. I feel like they're really kind of forces in how we define ourselves on a day-to-day and era-to-era basis. So yeah, I feel like one of the things I kept seeing in my characters, and this is where writers start to sound, like magical beings or something, that I kept seeing in my characters their willingness to believe in, some kind of future. And some of them, their future was something kind of bleak or even something really negative and bad. Like later in the book, you get to know the character of Joan Halford really well. And she's a very bigoted person, and she has a very closed-minded view of what she would call America. And her version of the future is something completely different from even what Ollie thinks back in the 40s. Yeah, for me, that was kind of the heart of the book, and the thing that made me passionate about it and want to work on it every day was that conflict. So,
right. In Rachel, in your book, like we get some feelings of otherness in the fact that Florence Adler's family is Jewish, and it's always interesting to watch like Gussie, when we're seeing things through Gussie's eyes, how she's experiencing that versus some of the older family members. And certainly, I mean, one of the things that I found very interesting in the book is, we associate Jewish people, fleeing the Third Reich as kind of, being a later in the 30s thing. But here you have these characters who were flushed out of Europe and suddenly finding themselves in Atlantic City, trying to start a new life. Talk about how, developing those themes in your novel.
Yeah. The Judaism came naturally. I'm Jewish. The family, that this happened to was a Jewish family. And so at the time, it didn't really occur to me not to write a Jewish family. But I did kind of realize as I moved through the book and as I, had a complete draft, how valuable it was that they were Jewish for the purposes of the story. Because there are all of these, rituals that are, kind of embedded in the Jewish faith for mourning and dealing with grief. And so when the family makes this decision to, lie about the death and not share it with the broader community, in order to protect their daughter, they're really denying themselves something, meaningful that could have potentially given them a lot of comfort. And so that was a very kind of valuable thing to discover that I wouldn't have been able to tell you when I started writing the book. The other thing that I wouldn't have been able to tell you initially was, as I wrote the Anna character, who's the one who immigrated over, and she's got parents who want to come to the United States, and she wants to be able to bring them. I started doing all this research into, what immigration, specifically Jewish immigration from Germany looked like during this time. And was really struck. I mean, this was 2016 was when I started writing the book. And so immigration was very much, a headline, right? And not to say it isn't now, but we've got a lot of other things going on now too. But at the time, it was something that we were talking about daily. And so as I started to really dig into this idea of belonging and what it meant to get out and how people were trying to get out, I was struck by the fact that in this era, in the early 30s, this is 34, the Third Reich's already in power. People already have reason to want to leave. But what was making it so difficult for them to go was not the Third Reich. The Third Reich in this time period was perfectly happy for them to.
Oh, sure. They were kicking them out, right?
Right. But what made it impossible was the U.S. State Department. The U.S. State Department was rife with anti-Semitism. And there were many years where we didn't even meet. We had quotas for, how many Jewish people we would take. And there were many years where we didn't even meet our quotas. We were actively trying to stop Jews from immigrating, and so nobody could get a straight answer. You could have in my book, the family is trying to do the right thing, and there are affidavits they're working on, and they're trying to be a sponsor, which was something that was somewhat common for American Jews who still had family in Europe. But nobody could really get a clear answer on what it even took to bring someone over. And that was, the doing of the U.S. government.
Right.
So that was a real eye opener for me.
Well, a lot of it, I mean, my understanding of it, a lot of it came down to class. If you were wealthy, you were probably going to be able to find a way. I mean, we didn't deny Albert Einstein when he wanted to come over here, right? But, if you were a poorer family, maybe we didn't have room for you.
Yeah, and even though if you had the money, often you couldn't get a clear answer on how much was needed and where it was going, and it was always come back next week. So it was obviously it was a mess and had dire consequences. But yeah.
Immigration a mess. God, where have I heard that? So that's certainly a theme. And Brian, there are a lot of themes in your book that are also like, we're still dealing with that. We're still dealing with that. We're still dealing with that. Was there one that in your research or in your understanding of the characters kind of really, I don't know, shocked you a little bit or surprised you in terms of like, oh my God, they were worrying about this in 1957 and here we still are?
I don't know that it shocked me, but one thing I kept thinking about and grew to understand even better while I was working on the book was racism and the civil rights struggle and how that was never completed. I feel like especially when I was growing up, the story on civil rights was like, hooray, it's won, that fight is over. And we should all move on in some way. And I mean, especially the last decade, we've seen again and again, that's absolutely not true. And, can kind of live in a bubble and believe that it's all over. But yeah, working on the book and thinking about it and thinking about the way that these characters think about issues of race and how they get along with one another and how they see, a future, especially just a very simple kind of ideal future of, well, maybe we can all just live together and get along. I mean, even that is so far from possible even now because of so many of our problems. That is something that I just kept coming back to and thinking about more and wanting to bring to the fore in the book. Because I guess maybe in a kind of related way, I'm really interested in the way that we build these narratives about history and about ourselves, and kind of let ourselves off the hook on things like this, whether it's gay rights or civil rights or the women's movement. These things happen, and we kind of just, as a country, decide, well, that's solved now. Let's all go eat some popcorn and just move on. And then they creep back in, and things still are needing to be dealt with. And that's, yeah, I guess as I was writing, I kept coming to this idea, like, can't we just get to work together, let's just do this.
As a nation, we have always specialized in amnesia, collective amnesia.
Just immediately forgetting.
Yeah. Which is why novels about the past are of course very important.
Yeah.
This brings me to a topic I certainly wanted to talk with you guys about, which is unfortunately the pandemic. People actually, I've had a number of people ask me, like, are you gonna write about the pandemic in your novels and this and that? And and I always say no, because as an author, of course, I'm going to write this book right now, and it'll come out, if I'm lucky, 1.5 years or 2 years from now. And, Lord knows what so I've always said that the best pandemic book is going to be written 10 years from now, right? When we can all kind of look in our rearview mirror and see what it is. But for you guys, two bright, shiny debut novelists, you have worked your whole lives to see your name on a book. You have dreamed of walking into a bookstore and being mobbed by adoring fans who want you to sign their body parts and sign their babies. And I mean, I can't tell you the number of babies I've signed in my time as an author. And instead, your book comes out, yes, smack dab in the middle of a global pandemic. How was that for you? It sounds just great to me, let me tell you.
Well, I mean, I don't know, Brian. I think we got about as lucky as we could get for books that came out in the pandemic, because we came out a week apart in the middle of the summer. And so it was that brief window of time when people kind of came out of their homes for a few days. And then, before things got so bad in the winter. So there was that, at least. Like, that was like a tiny silver lining. But I don't know, how many in-person book events did you do, Brian?
Oh, none.
Yeah.
I counted one, because I went to Magic City Books here in Tulsa, where I am tonight, masked and everything, I guess it was last winter, maybe last fall. I just happened in. I was like, can I send some books? And I'll count that as an in-person event. That was as close as I got. It was all virtual.
Yeah, I mean, I get the question all the time, like, how did the pandemic affect the book? And I think, for both of us, probably, we're debut authors. We don't have anything to compare it to. So it's like, on one hand, anecdotally, like, I know that people were at home reading, because what else were we doing, right? But on the other hand, they weren't in bookstores, you couldn't browse the same way. So I don't know. I mean, Brad, you've produced a lot of books at different points. So you may have a better sense of, like, how the pandemic actually affected, book sales. I mean, I know it made me sad.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely, because so my 10th and then my 11th book both came out, during various points of the pandemic when the numbers were at varying spots. And it's like, it really goes to, like, why do you write? Like, why do we do what we do, right? And we can tackle that if you want to. But, like, for me, I've always written for other people. I have, like, I have not written for myself. I write to be read. And so I love going to the bookstore and meeting throngs and throngs of, like, maybe 8 or 10, 12 people, right? But I enjoy that process, that, like, actually getting to see face to face, like, who am I writing for, right? And how are they responding to this stuff? And so to not have that interaction has been, I feel like I'm being deprived of something.
I will say, So because my book has Jewish themes, the Jewish Book Council did a lot for it, and really promoted the ability for Jewish organizations in the country to have me come speak through Zoom, or that kind of thing, and that was lovely. And I do think that the pandemic allowed a lot of older people who weren't as good with technology, like, they had to get on board, right? It was like the way suddenly we all had to be good at it, no matter whether we wanted to be or not. It was our only connection. So I was able to visit with a lot of people. To your point about, wanting to connect with your readers. I mean, I kind of have to believe I connected with more readers online than I would have if I had been a debut author going to bookstores. Do you feel the same, Brian?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I mean, I enjoyed the online events, and it did feel, I think the coolest thing about online events is that we all kind of quickly, I don't know when it was, like in no time though, we all realized that these events go really well if another author is there. And so it became this, really cool thing. Every week or two, I'd be online talking with some author that, especially like authors I look up to and stuff. And then we'd get questions from the audience, and it did feel like there was a connection. At other times, though, yeah, it did kind of feel like you wrote a book and threw it down a well or something. Like you just kind of felt like, what is this? Did this even happen? And because you couldn't, as you said, for months, you couldn't even go into the store and see, like, do they have it? Does anybody have it?
I think I've still only seen my book in like 3 bookstores or something. Yeah. Like, it's still weird because, I'm still not out that much. Like that kind of out, like,
yeah, that's true.
So,
yeah.
So what about in terms of your writing? I mean, how has the pandemic affected your writing, or has it not?
I've got 3 kids, Brian.
Not said.
Brian's gonna be like, well, I've been so productive.
Yeah,
it was hard at first. It made it really hard at first. Suddenly being at home all the time. My initial thought was like, there was a kind of joke going around on Twitter for a while that, what was it? Shakespeare wrote Hamlet or Twelfth Night or something during some kind of pandemic, and it became a joke among writers. And I think when it first started, I was like, oh yeah, I'm home. I'll get all kinds of work done. And it actually turned out I couldn't do anything. I just paced the house and talked to my dogs. I started singing to my dogs all the time. I just in this ridiculous routine, and then eventually I did start writing again, and getting quite a bit of work done. But yeah, it took a while. It was just such a shock. It was such a kind of depressing feeling, I think, for all of us, just to be stuck suddenly.
Yeah, I kind of became aware of like how much I relied on kind of like random interactions that I would have that would find their way into my fiction, and whether that's like a conversation I have with a fellow parent while we're, waiting to pick up our kids, or, you're just, you're in book tour, you're after the event, you're at a bar, you're meeting some random salesperson, you end up sitting down and chatting with them. And the next thing you know, you're putting their life story in your next novel. I mean, or just even just the random things that people say to you that like, you'll just be like, oh, I'll take that and like stick it in. Right. Versus, you're suddenly, I want to go back to this singing to your dogs, Brian. What do you sing to your dogs? Are they like, do they like R&B? Do they like hip hop? Do they like pop? Like, what are they into?
They like whatever I sing to them. That's what they like. I'm singing things like "Let's go outside" or "You want some food" or something. But it's whatever song is in my head.
He's singing. He might feed us again.
It's bad. It's really bad. I hope that my biggest fear is that my wife is going to turn on the security camera in our house sometime when I'm home, just like, singing like Hall & Oates versions of like "Who Wants to Go Outside and Catch a Ball" or something. It's really lame. I would say what you just mentioned, it's also so important for writers just to observe people, like interact with people, observe people, be part of their own little drama, whatever they're worried about or talking about or whatever. That's so crucial to what we do. And I didn't realize I was missing it the first couple of weeks, but that was suddenly gone.
writing with children in the house, I don't know about you, but my children, because I was like one door away from where like the whole family was Zooming, right? Like my children heard daddy yell a lot at them. Like more, they probably in the months of like March, April, and May heard daddy yell more than they had in the 3 years before that. Of like, I'm trying to write. Oh my God. You were surely much more calm and composed than I was.
Well, I don't know. I mean, we had a system. So my husband's a professor, and we so he was on Zoom. Everyone was on Zoom, you know. But we were homeschooling my second grader and all of last year, and so we would divide up the day, and you know, it was like I got the mornings to write, he got the afternoons to teach and do his stuff, and so you know, and then we were homeschooling when we weren't right. So I had to be really productive with my time, which is something I was used to because I was working full time when I wrote the first novel. But I had kind of had dreams that this next go round, I would be able to write like in normal human hours. And so that has not happened yet. But you know, everyone went back to school last month, and knock on wood, they stay there. So.
Right. Well, so that you get into what I call, and I talk with writers about this all the time, the myth of the ideal writing day, right? Like you tell yourself that there's some writer out there who, you know, wakes up every morning fully refreshed after a perfect night's sleep, and then they go to the beautiful hand-carved table in their hacienda where you know, Pierre, their manservant, cracks open the laptop lid for them and then serves them
a little yoga.
Yes. Well, yeah, after, of course, they have self-actualized with their yoga, and Pierre serves them tea, and then they perfectly centered and relaxed sit down and let the words flow through their fingers onto, like, it's never happens, right? It just, like, the ideal writing day never, ever happens. And so, like, you have to, like, yeah, I always say, like, you have to tell yourself you're the toughest person alive. Like, and I'm going to write today, even though the dogs need to be sang to, the dishes need to be done. I have, like, you know, this errand, that thing, that family thing, that whatever, that, you know, all the distractions and all the things. Like, nope, those are gone. I'm just going to write because I'm the toughest man alive. I don't know. Does that work for you ever?
I mean, I try to crank it out no matter what. You know, some days are better than others, but yeah, I mean, I do try to have a word count and.
Okay, you know, let's get deep. What's your word count?
Well, it depends if I'm on deadline or not. Like right now.
See, I'm like 1,000 words a day guy.
Oh no, I can't do that much. But okay. I'm writing in. I'm also, the book I'm working on right now is set in 1811. So like, I gotta go slower than that. Just every word, I'm like, is that the right word? Is that the right word? Is that the right word? So it's taking me a little bit longer. But Brian.
All right. Yeah, so we. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
Oh, I was going to say, I too just try to write in snatches. I always dream of finding a perfect schedule, and, you know, the next time I'll have a perfect schedule, you know, next week I'll start the perfect schedule. And then I just end up, one day I'm writing at 2:00 in the afternoon. One day I start at 8 a.m. Sometimes it's, 200 words. Sometimes it's 2,000 or more or whatever, but it's just kind of happens. And it'd be great to have that ideal, super productive, perfectly scheduled life. Somebody must be doing it. You hear about it. We're famous writers that are like, yeah, I did that.
Yeah, even them, when you really get to talk to them, it doesn't happen. So so we're gonna dive into some questions we have from the audience, and certainly those of you, like I said, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, you can tap them in the comments, and we're happy to deal with these. So we have a question for Brian. Please elaborate on, what does working the Carney circuit mean?
Well, for me, it meant working with my friend Jason, who painted those T-shirts, those really kind of cheap T-shirts that have like a bulldog on the end of a chain with like the word "stylin" over it in cursive or something.
The really classy stuff, you mean?
The really classy stuff. He made the shirts, and I would like take money and take orders. And it was really cool because it was a lot of traveling, and we'd show up, but we would be it was the carny circuit. We would be at little state fairs, carnival events, those kind of things, and we were often like right next to the rides and things like that. It'd be like noisy ride music and crashing and screaming and everything else, and cotton candy everywhere and all that stuff. Somebody selling like knockoff cassette tapes over here that are not at all legal and things. And then, him painting me shirts. One really cool thing happened. He tells this story as well. But the coolest thing that ever happened to us was we were once in Austin at the Texas State Fair, and Destiny's Child was playing. And this person who, as this like punk rock kid that didn't know anything about what was going on in the world at the time, I didn't know who this person was, came up, like sailed to the front of the line and said that they wanted one of every shirt with the name Beyonce on it. And then she left, and there was all these people around that were just like screaming and crying, and there were men in suits around her, and we were just like, what? And like 10 minutes later, one of the guys in suits came back and said, yeah, Miss Beyonce wants one of each. Jason was painting all night. It was
Brian, you meant like you could have been crazy in love with Beyonce, and it would change. Instead, there you were sucking down corn dogs at the state fair, like getting into Beyonce's entourage. Like you missed your moment.
I missed it.
All right, so we have a question for Rachel. Rachel, did you ever consider writing Florence Adler Swims Again as nonfiction because it was based on a real family story?
I get that question a lot. I did not. I had written a decent amount of nonfiction in one way or the other, over the years. And, the bummer about nonfiction is you can't make stuff up. And with this story, I knew some things. My grandmother had told me the basic story. And I was able to do a little research. I mean, there was a newspaper article, that gave some details about her death. And I had her old yearbook from high school, like a few little things. But I really didn't have very much. And there weren't a ton of people to interview because, of course, it happened 90 years ago. So I wouldn't have had more than I could use for an essay or, something. And I really I was ready to write fiction. I was excited by writing fiction. And so I knew that I knew enough of the story to provide kind of a backbone and a structure for a novel. But it also left me with a lot of leeway to, just write the best book I could write. And that was what I set out to do. And I always gave myself permission to, veer away from the story when I needed to for the, in order to create, the kind of art I wanted to create.
Right. Well, yeah. And anybody who's tried to write nonfiction knows, I mean, especially if you're going back 100 years where you can't interview people, almost everyone's dead. It's like, if you don't have some terrific primary source material, someone's kept a diary, there's
Right.
some kind of, detailed whatever, like it's really, really hard to do. So I totally understand that. And then, you get into that thing of, with fiction, and Brian referenced this earlier, like when you see things in your characters, right? And the characters, I always say that, like, the characters talk to me, right? And I talk back to them, and we all sound like we're crazy fiction people when we say that, but like the characters do start talking to you, right? And in nonfiction, you have to, you can't listen to them, but in fiction, you go, tell me more about that, right? and that's where the story comes from.
Yeah.
So I see we are out of questions, and we are about an hour in. So I think at this point, I will graciously thank both of you for your time, for the wonderful novels you have written. I wish you both the best of luck on Saturday night. The big award ceremony, again, virtual, but everyone be sure to tune in. Adriana Trigiani will once again be our esteemed MC, and she is a delight and a wonderful voice to have. And so at this point, I will thank you both, and thank you to our audience for attending. And now I will bring Joseph Papa back in, my esteemed fellow board member, to wrap us up. Joseph, take it away.
Excuse me. I should have done that before coming on. I apologize.
Hot mic. Here we go.
So much. I know. I was, anyway, I apologize. No one wanted to hear that. Thank you all so much for that excellent conversation. It was a lot of fun. I still have questions about the Carney circuit, but hopefully, and Beyonce.
And especially Beyonce.
Clearly,
those.
need for a book.
I want Jason to write. Jason's a great nonfiction writer living down in New Orleans, and I want him to write an essay about it or something. I feel like he could do it justice.
Please ask him to move to Virginia so we can honor him. Again, thank you all so much for being here, and thanks to the library staff and the events staff at Eventful for putting this together. As we close the evening, I would like to once again ask everybody to consider supporting the Library of Virginia by calling 804-692-3900 or visiting the link on your screen. And be sure to join us tomorrow evening for our poetry panel. And the finalists for that award are Bill Gloss, Annie Kim, and Kiki, well, I practiced it, Petrosino, Kiki Petrosino, I apologize. And that'll be moderated by Anna Scotti. And of course, please, as Brad mentioned, tune in on Saturday at 6 p.m. to find out who this year's awards winners are with host Adriana Trigiani. Good night, and thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.